Today, we are talking with a fantastic author about the reality of going back and forth every other week.
I'm Cameron. I spent years building my career and creating a life I loved. And when my Prince Charming finally showed up, he had 4 kids in tow. Fast forward through lots of mistakes made and lessons learned, step-family life was much more complicated than I realized. If you're looking for help with blended family life, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Stepmom Diaries, where we keep it real as we dish about all the things. This is your weekly dose of blended family inspiration and encouragement. You're not the wicked stepmother, so let me help you find your fairy tale ending. Come on, let's do this.
Welcome. Today we have got our second guest of the year, which is also kind of an unusual guest for the Stepmom Diaries. Not a stepmom. But we do have an author today who has written a great book about blended families, and I wanted to bring this to you. His book is called Every Other Weekend, Coming of Age with Two Different Dads. His name is Anthony Mohr. He has won the Firebird Award in the nonfiction category with this book, and it's a fascinating look at what it's like to grow up in a blended family. A quick little synopsis of the book. Anthony's father, Gerald Mohr, was a well-known radio actor before he slipped down to the Hollywood B-list when television was invented. He accepted the lead in a dying Swedish TV series and instead fell for the script girl and divorced Anthony's mother, who went on to meet and marry another divorced person who was the credit card industry pioneer Stanley Dashew. Anthony in the book talks about, how he is trying to find his place between these two different lifestyles. One weekend he's sailing on his stepfather's catamaran, and the next his Swedish stepmother tells him that they're poor. And all of this coming of age in a time when divorce is rare and viewed as somewhat shocking. So it's a great read. Let me tell you a little bit about Anthony, and then we'll jump right in. He has served for 26 years as a judge on the Superior Court of California County of Los Angeles. He also sat as a judge pro tem on the California Court of Appeals, and in January 2021 became a fellow at the Advanced Leadership Initiative at Harvard University and is now senior editor of the Harvard ALI Social Impact Review. His stories and essays have received 6 Pushcart Prize nominations, and he has worked on the staffs of Evening Street Review, Fifth Wednesday Journal, Hippocampus Magazine, and Under the Sun. This is a fun discussion. Anthony's book is fascinating. I hope you'll check it out. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And with that, let's dive in. Anthony, it's so nice to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, Cameron, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. So I have to say, this is an unusual interview in that you are not a stepmom, and a lot of my guests are.
Last time I
looked. I always start my interviews by asking my stepmom guests what their stepmom origin story is. Your book is actually your stepfamily origin story.
Right.
And I love the perspective that you tell in the book, kind of coming from a kid growing up in a stepfamily. But before we get into all that, tell me a little bit about what made you want to tell the story. Tell me a little bit about how the book evolved and all of that.
You got it. Okay. My parents had a very good friend who was a literary agent, Reese Halsey, and his wife, Doris, was also an agent. The two of them worked together. And while I was a lawyer, at that point, my folks had split up and both had remarried. And she said, you really have a story here because your father was a known actor. Your stepfather is a known person in business, kind of an entrepreneur. He was involved in manufacturing the machines that are used to imprint and emboss the Bank of America card. Now it's Visa. So you've got a story to tell. And I said, Doris, I'm too busy practicing law. And then I became a judge. Once more, she reached out and said, you've got to write the book. And I said,
because all of a sudden you were less busy as a judge, right?
Well, I was still busy and I was getting used to the job and really enjoying it. And the last thing I wanted to do was sit back and write a book.
Yeah.
But I always did enjoy writing. I had written, and I went to a couple of writing conferences. And for one of them, I submitted a couple of essays about life in California and mentioned my parents in them. And a couple of the people who were instructors in the conference said, "You've got a lot more here to say. You really ought to write something." And that was when did I go to Squaw Valley? That was 2008. And I didn't really do much with it except write a few essays. And the essays would get their way into some small literary journals. And then COVID came along. And I thought about retiring. And I thought, okay, this might be a good time to write the book. And then I became a fellow at Harvard for the Advanced Leadership Initiative. So everything came together. And I had the time to write the book. I decided to retire, wrote the book, was fortunate to get it published. Now I'm a part-time judge, but I'm still enjoying writing. And that's how the book came to be.
I love that. So tell me a little bit about the book. I know, you do have this unique perspective where your dad was an actor. Talk a little bit about that. And then your stepdad from the business perspective. I mean, what a fascinating kind of duality of, having your dad and your stepdad in very different environments that you're going back and forth. Tell me a little bit about all that.
Well, you're right. They were polar opposites. It's hard to think of two more opposite individuals. My dad is the actor. He's living life large. He's having a lot of fun. In many ways, he was kind of a Peter Pan. He, would love to have, quote unquote, have laughs with his friends, end quote, at the Brown Derby until the wee hours. He loved his women. He wasn't exactly a faithful husband to either of his wives. He was very liberal. He loved Adlai Stevenson and John Kennedy. He actually stumped the state for Bobby Kennedy and was at the Ambassador when Bobby was shot.
Oh, wow.
Stan, on the other hand, had helped Gerald Ford get a start in Michigan, comes out to California, gets very close to Nixon, almost took a job in the Nixon administration. He didn't, only because he loved being in business on his own, and he was the hard-bitten, hard-driving businessman. My dad loved to have fun. Whenever we got together following the divorce, we had fun. Stan said, quote unquote, children should not have that much fun. He wanted kids to work. And so, and he was more into discipline than my own father was. He was absolutely true blue to my mother, unlike my father. They were very different individuals. And so, spending alternate weekends with them, kind of showed me two completely different ways of living, if you will, and two completely different cultures. I mean, it would be as if you spent one weekend in Japan and the next weekend in, Zambia or someplace like that. They were very different.
So tell me a little bit about that. I mean, kids, one of the things that I see with step families is that kids often get kind of this push-pull between their biological or primary parent and the step parent. And even when there's no conflict there, they feel like this loyalty bind. Like, well, if I like stepmom, I'm being disloyal to mom. Like, how did you experience that with these two very different, men, these two very different dads in your life?
Yes. I mean, fortunately, nobody ever said you've got to make a decision.
Right.
But I did feel the push-pull. And it kind of translated this way. I might go over to my father's place, and something, usually thanks to his second wife, who wasn't the best in the world, it was something would get me angry or upset or sad. And I think, boy, I'm really glad I live with my mother and Stan. I'm spending 5 days a week there. Then I'd be with my mom and Stan would talk about how kids have got to work. And you've got it easy. You've got to start working more. And I think, I really like my father. I'd rather be there. And, I never articulated that. But, I thought about it a lot.
Well, and as a kid, you're struggling. I mean, those are emotions that you probably can't articulate at that age, right? Like, because how old were you when they got divorced? You were 8 or 9, right?
I was 9 when they split up.
Yeah.
I was 11 when they both remarried.
Right. Okay. Yeah. At that age, you're dealing with you're headed into your teenage years. I mean, you just cannot understand all of those different emotions. You just know that you might feel angry or.
Yeah. I wasn't sure I felt angry. in some ways, I felt grateful when my mother remarried. I wanted her to get married again. I knew she was very unhappy being single. And she could have married King Kong, and I would have been happy about it. You know, luckily, she picked a good guy. I remember the one before that was somebody named Dr. Glass, this reedy, wimpy little string bean of a guy that I didn't care for at all. But it didn't go anywhere, thank goodness. So in many ways, I sort of felt grateful. But yeah, it was difficult getting used to two different families, and neither family was what I had grown up with. So my father's there with Mai, the name of his second wife, who's creating some problems, I must tell you. And my mother's there with Stan, and Stan's got a whole different outlook on things and about child rearing. So yeah, it took some getting used to.
So how did you adapt to the different dynamics in each household? Because that is hard.
It is. I don't know. I mean, there's a side of me that was like a cork bobbing on the water. There was a side of me that would rebel. I can be pretty oppositional. And so there were times when I would be with my father and I'd say something or do something or act as though life is better on the other side. Mm-hmm. And then I do exactly that with my mother and Stan. But most of the time I was trying to adapt, trying not to push back, trying not to fight back. But it wasn't the easiest life in either household.
And how did that impact you as you got older and, formed your own relationships and family? And
I got used to it. Cameron, I got used to it. I dealt with it. It was interesting navigating two different cultures. Maybe I'm lucky because we had lived in Sweden for a year before the divorce, where my dad was filming a series. And so I was in a Swedish school having to learn a new language and get along with kids from a different country. So I had done it on some level. It wasn't easy back then. It was quite difficult, but I had done it. And so I guess I was able to apply whatever quote unquote lessons I had to the alternate weekends. And, as I got older, it was fun. It was fun. I didn't think in terms of, I've got to go to a different culture. It's just, okay, time to be with my dad for 2 days.
Yeah.
All right. Next week, I'm now with my mother and Stan.
Yeah. Yeah. So, society's attitudes about all this stuff has changed a lot since your parents got divorced. And my parents got divorced when I was about that same age. I was about 8 or 9. And since my parents got divorced, I've noticed, it's a lot less stigmatized now than I think it was. And, therapy is a lot more accepted. When I was little, there's no way that my parents would have put me in therapy because you didn't do that, and now of course, our whole family's in therapy. We love it, I don't know. Tell me about how societal attitudes towards divorce and blended families, how that has changed and kind of what you have seen. And how do you think that it would have been different if you were growing up today?
Well, back then it was shameful. Now I'm fortunate. Yeah. Nobody ever teased me or got angry at me or, up to my knowledge, avoided me because I came from a quote unquote broken home. In high school, I didn't go out that much, but I'm not aware of any girl who refused to go out with me because I, came from a divorced background. That may have been the case. Plenty of women said no, and I asked them out. But that I thought that was Joe because, I was ugly and my mother dressed me funny or something like that, not because of a divorce. I may be wrong about that. What I do know is that, I wanted to be many children who divorce, end up with really badly behaved kids, go the wrong way, get into drugs, substance abuse, whatever. I went the other way. I wanted to be with the good kids because I needed school to be the stable center of my world. And so I ended up succeeding in that respect. And all of the guys and girls that I ended up being close with came from very stable 2-parent households. There was not one who came from a broken home. There was one boy I was friendly with. He was not in my crowd, but he lived nearby and he was very clever. And so we were friends, sort of. His parents were divorced. And he was disturbed. He had a lot of problems. Looking back, he probably was on the spectrum. And my other friends didn't want anything to do with him. But I was fortunate that, I was accepted without any problem. And my house in many ways became a social center because I lived near the school. So a lot of times we'd gather at my place, and they loved Stan. They got along with him. He liked to be with them. It's interesting. Somebody in another interview not that long ago asked me, what did your friends think of your stepfather and your father? And the answer is they didn't, because they never met both. I have one friend who met the two of them. And
wow.
That is it. That is it. They didn't meet my own father.
That's interesting.
Yeah, one guy did. We were in a sixth grade play together. My dad came to watch it, and he came back and congratulated the cast. And Larry met my father then, that one and only time. But all the other times we were together, which was dozens, he only knew Stan.
Wow.
Yeah.
And was that on purpose or just the way it happened?
The way it happened.
Wow,
I never
that's
thought, I want them to meet my father, or I don't want them to meet my father.
Yeah.
It just happened that way.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so how did you, obviously, you went the way of, studying in good grades and ended up in law school and becoming a judge. How has your upbringing and, growing up with such diverse family dynamics, how has that informed, your tenure as a judge, your career and decisions?
What I would say, Cameron, to anybody who ends up in two different households as a child, become a judge. You're getting prepared for it. Life with two households is good preparation for the bench, because as you know, you went to law school. Cases involve two different sides to a story.
Yeah.
And if you're growing up in one parent, in one household, you're getting one aspect of the world, one culture.
Yeah.
Grow up two households, you're learning to adapt to two different cultures, and tacitly or otherwise seeing both sides of a story.
Well, I had not thought about that perspective, but you heard it here first. If you're growing up in a blended family, be a judge.
Think about
I love it.
Neither of my parents was overly critical of the other. Nobody sat there and said, "Oh, your mother's a witch or your father's an ogre," and a lot of times that happens, as you know.
It does, far too often.
Yeah, they didn't do that, but at the same time, you're seeing, their own attitudes, and you can. And you're seeing how they themselves differ from your other parent. And you're getting the understanding as maybe now I kind of know why they split up.
Yeah.
I see what was going on here.
Well, your point about how the politics differed so drastically between your dad and your stepdad is a good example of that, right?
Yeah.
So what advice do you have? I think in today's world, obviously, politics are just so heated, and so many families can't even talk about it with each other. How would you advise family members with? We
have family reunions now where we just all agree not to talk politics, which is sad because, before 2016, my stepdad had a sister who was very liberal. Aunt Betty was extremely, to the left. And they always debated at Christmas reunions, and we loved it. It was kind of a family tradition. We'd sit there and watch Stan and Aunt Betty go at it, and they loved each other, and it was fine. You don't have that anymore, which I think is tragic.
Yeah, that it is tragic. I know so many people, and my family included, where you have people who have lots of different viewpoints, and you just can't even talk about it anymore.
Yeah. Neither my father nor Stan got angry at me if I voiced an opinion that was different from their politics. Stan just sort of, if I talked about being a Democrat, he just kind of shrugged it off. You'll learn, that kind of thing. You'll get older and learn. My dad would sit down and try to be very intellectual about it and explain why Eisenhower was such a horrible president. Okay. Or why Richard Nixon was such a crook or something like that.
Yeah.
But he would do it at a very, very easy level. I ended up as interning for the Nixon Agnew campaign in '68. And my father was disappointed over it, but he never got angry at me. He just let me do it. He knew I was going to write my senior thesis on the '68 campaign, and I was getting a ringside seat. I was working with people who were very high up in the campaign, including Richard Kleindienst, Pat Hitt, Robert Ellsworth, most of whom avoided Watergate. Kleindienst didn't, but Pat Hitt and Bob Ellsworth did. They were never involved. And the good news is I was offered a job in '72 and I turned it down.
Yeah, exactly. That is good.
And as we say, Cameron, that's another story. That's another 2-hour interview right there. That's what happened then.
But that's good that you were able to coexist with them both, regardless of where you all landed on that kind of stuff, because I think it is hard for a lot of families today.
It is. And that was their, they both had that as a good aspect of their personalities. Neither one insisted I adopt their viewpoint or, and their politics. They just said, okay, you'll do what you want and, adopt whatever worldview works for you.
Yeah. That is good. That is good. I think today that's maybe the exception rather than the norm, unfortunately.
Afraid you're right.
Yeah. Well, what advice would you have for people? I guess let's start with for kids who, are dealing with, and now I think, it's really common for kids to have 50% with one parent, 50% with another. What advice would you give for them as they go back and forth?
I guess, it depends on their age. If you're 9 years old, the advice I'm going to give is probably not going to resonate very well with a 9-year-old. I'd rather start with the advice of the parents.
All right.
Job one is get the kid into therapy.
Yes. Oh, amen.
Cameron, as you said, it was never done back then.
Yeah, no, it wasn't.
Yeah. If you were going to a psychologist, you were crazy.
Yes. That's how it was when I was growing up. Did you hear so-and-so's in therapy? There must be something wrong. Yeah. And now, of course, all of our kids have been in therapy and all of their friends have been in, and everybody talks about it. It's no big deal.
Okay. Yeah. I remember hearing, there was this one guy in my high school and he said to me, I have to see my psychologist today. I thought, whoa, Leland must be really sick. He's mental.
Yeah.
Well, Leland happened to be one of the brightest kids in the class, one of the most talented in the class. He ended up at Harvard. Regrettably, he died of AIDS. But he was the only one I knew who was seeing a psychologist, or at least admitted to it. So that would be job one. As far as the kids go, the chances are very good that both sides love the child and are trying to do their best for him. Generally, that's it. Yes, there are step parents who don't like the child, who want to get rid of the kid, send them off, pack them off to boarding school or to a military school or something like that. But I'd say the majority of new step parents want to do well by the child.
Yeah, I would say that's right. I'd say the overwhelming majority of step parents are just trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, and if that's the case, then if the child can understand that and internalize that, they're going to do better because they're going to recognize, I may not like what he or she is doing, but, this sounds so trite to say, they're doing it for my own good.
Yeah.
They're trying
it's so hard for kids to get that, even with their parents,
Yeah. That's, I guess, would be the main piece of advice I would give.
Yeah.
Because that was sort of, as I wrote the book, and one of the takeaways I got was these were two good men who were trying their best to do the right thing. Both had a boatload of faults, a huge amount of faults, very different faults. My dad being, the womanizer, the guy who was kind of immature, but he was the life of the party. He always was there with the right jokes. He was a brilliant guy. He could hold forth on any topic. Okay. Stan, on the other hand, not much of a conversationalist, kind of a two-trick pony. He talked business and he loved to sail. So it was business and boats. But, he was a strict disciplinarian and he was quiet and hard to get to know.
Well, I think that the ability to kind of take that hindsight and kind of examine what they may have been going through at the time and process all of that is wonderful. And I appreciate you doing that for your readers and for our listeners today. I think it's been really interesting. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's been a delight, Cameron. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's it for this week. If you've enjoyed our chat, I hope you'll help spread the word. Share this episode with friends and head on over to wherever you listen to podcasts and leave me a review. And don't forget, for more great stepmom content, head on over to thiscustomlife.com and follow me on social media. Just search This Custom Life on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. Until next time, you keep being you and know that we are in this together. See you here next week.